Okay, let's dive right into this explainer, because today we are unpacking an absolute powerhouse of a book. We're looking at Sheelam Bhadraiah's novel Indivulsa. Now, as literature critics have pointed out, what really makes this novel demand your attention is how it achieves profound global literary standards, and it does it all using simple, accessible Indian English. It's honestly a remarkable feat. The author manages to capture a deeply regional, historical soul and somehow elevates it perfectly to a global stage. It just goes to show you don't need super convoluted prose to deliver an absolute masterclass in storytelling. Before we break down the narrative itself, let's take a quick look at our blueprint. These are the 10 specific traits that give this story its global soul. We're talking about a nonlinear narrative, deep psychological depth, and ecological resonance, which specifically tackles air, water, and plastic pollution. Then there's Subaltern Agency and self-respect, a really poignant diasporic perspective, and humanistic neutrality. All of this ultimately builds toward a powerful cathartic arc. And the whole thing is historically anchored in the anti-Razakar movement, showcasing a 3-generation fight for transgenerational justice and social equity. I know, it's a packed framework, but it is executed brilliantly. So to grasp all of this without getting completely overwhelmed, we're going to explore these themes through 5 quick sections. History and nonlinear narrative, 3 generations for justice, subaltern agency and psychology, ecology and diasporic exile, and finally, the final cathartic arc. All right, let's move right into section 1, history and nonlinear narrative. Think about this quote for a second, because it brilliantly illustrates the novel's core philosophy. This line is delivered by Professor Gopal, a character whose unique gift is kind of merging a modern university classroom with the heavy nonlinear flashbacks of his ancestors. The narrative totally refuses to move in a straight line. Instead, it operates a lot like human memory. It's constantly pulling the reader back into the blood-soaked soil of the past to help explain the absolute truths of the present. The author uses some incredible historical anchoring here, specifically grounding the events in the real-world anti-Razakar movement. This is where the working masses of 18 different villages rose up against the feudal lords, known as the Doras. But here's the thing, this isn't just a historical backdrop. The author uses this rebellion as this cyclical ghost that haunts the modern timeline. In this novel, the past is never actually in the past. It's this active, simmering undercurrent that is driving the characters' actions decades and decades later. Which brings us perfectly to section 2, 3 generations for justice. The crucial takeaway here is that this fight for social equity spans 3 completely distinct eras. Back in the 1940s, we see grandfathers like Surudu, Yakub, and Shivadu leading a literal, armed, physical rebellion against feudal tyrants. Fast forward, and the second generation faces a totally different kind of violence. We're talking systemic displacement and urban exile. And finally, in the modern day, the third generation, represented by students like Karthi and Wahida, they pick up the mantle. But they aren't using iron rifles, right? They launch a digital revolution against corporate ecocide. The resistance adapts right alongside the oppression. And by comparing these 2 antagonists, the novel achieves this incredible sense of transgenerational equity. On one side, you've got the historic feudal Dora, who extracts unpaid physical labor, known as Vedi. On the other side, you have his descendant, the corporate Dora, who extracts profit by literally stealing clean air and water, enforcing a plastic ecocide through sneaky legal frameworks. The novel makes it abundantly clear. Institutional exploitation survives simply by changing its clothes. The master just swaps a traditional khadi shirt for a tailored suit behind a corporate desk.
Moving right along to section 3, subaltern agency and psychology.
The text repeatedly throws out this really powerful terminology, sabandhavargalu, to showcase subaltern agency. The novel emphasizes that oppressors use artificial caste fences to keep the masses fractured. So to achieve true freedom and self-respect, or Atma Gauravam, these marginalized communities have to totally abandon their fractured identities. They have to fight as a single, indivisible current, almost like a mighty river pooling together from a bunch of tiny mountain streams. Listen to this incredibly visceral quote. It gives us a direct window into the sheer psychological depth of the novel. The author isn't just chronicling physical battles, he is mapping the internal, structural agony of these characters. We literally see how generational trauma courses through their veins. The memories of their ancestors' executions aren't just campfire stories, they're described as this uncleansed, open ulcer sitting right inside their consciousness. But building immediately on that trauma, the author introduces this concept of humanistic neutrality. Despite all the intense violence and injustice we see in the source material,
the narrative actually frames the conflict incredibly objectively. As Professor Gopal explains, human life journeys on an irreversible vector between truth and falsehood. This subaltern struggle isn't portrayed as some partisan political vendetta. It's a natural, structural imperative for survival. It's exactly like water seeking a gradient. Nature just naturally inclines toward truth and defies suppression.
Now, let's hit a theme in Section 4 that is terrifyingly relevant today: ecology and diasporic exile. This novel paints a devastating picture of environmental destruction. We see the sacred Petru River transformed into literal chemical venom by pharmaceutical and plastic plants. Palm groves wither into black ash, and the author brilliantly links this to the death of traditional earthen crafts, which are violently replaced by this suffocating synthetic plastic matrix. It's a really chilling look at how corporate greed violently ruptures the sacred, life-giving bond between people and their natural environment. And because of that environmental destruction, we get this heartbreaking diasporic perspective. Stripped of their ancestral soil and quite literally poisoned out of their valley by industrial pipelines, the folks from those 18 villages are forced into a permanent internal exile. They end up trapped in the toxic metropolitan slum of Srinagar. You watch these characters mourn the loss of their maternal land while they're just struggling to survive in this alien, commercialized urban grid, a place where even a breath of fresh air has been commodified. To really understand the root of their exile, we have to talk about Doratnam. The text explicitly notes that an individual oppressor, a single Dora, might die off, but Doratnam, which is the institutional structure of being a master, persists. All this modern development that's driving the villagers out, the new dams and chemical plants, it's revealed to be just a new mask for archaic tyranny, designed specifically to permanently displace the poor for corporate profit. So, with all this massive systemic oppression stacked against them, how does a multi-generational struggle finally resolve? Let's finish up with Section 5, the final cathartic arc. The narrative ultimately achieves its catharsis through the rebirth of the Agandam, which translates to the eternal, towering flame. Now, historically, for the grandfathers, the Agandam was a literal physical torch of resistance. But in the climax of the novel, the third generation, Karthi and Wahida, they modernized the flame. They transformed the Agandam into a digital network. They weaponized the alphabet and digital interfaces to expose these corporate crimes to the entire global consciousness. It's a complete strategic outmaneuver by the third generation. They realize fighting through corrupt institutional courts is a lost cause because the oppressor's capital already controls them. So instead, they use digital mobilization to unite their diaspora online. They deploy drone surveillance in the dead of night to capture absolute, undeniable video evidence of toxic chemicals being pumped directly into the river. And then they broadcast this truth to the Praja Court, the court of public opinion, completely bypassing the corrupt state machinery. And that brings us to the ultimate catharsis. Through this digital revolution, the truth is laid bare, and the cycle of transgenerational justice is finally fulfilled. The text gorgeously describes the Petru River laundering her current, finally throwing off the industrial filth. The ancestral heroism of the grandfathers is successfully passed down to the youth. And it brings this profound structural peace to the surviving elders, proving once and for all that knowledge, the alphabet, and collective consciousness are the ultimate tools for liberation. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We've just seen how Indivulsa masterfully explores the evolution of both exploitation and resistance. So if the institutional structure of oppression is constantly adapting, constantly changing its clothes, what modern Agandam, what eternal flame of truth are you utilizing to protect the truth and the environment in your own community? It's a powerful question, and it's one this phenomenal piece of literature absolutely begs us all to answer.